Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will just give people another minute or two to arrive, and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you for joining this morning. This is the fourth and last workshop in the SEND series that I'm delivering this academic year. There'll be obviously new SEND updates next academic year. And this one follows on from last week's workshop to look more closely at the documentation that supports the adaptations in pupils' learning that we provide for students with SEND at Amnoi Sin. We also take a brief look at transitions, and that is how people, how staff support the movement from one class to the next, or from one phase to another phase of students with specific needs. Okay, so thank you for joining. It is being recorded. We'll just run through the in-house slides before we get started. Just checking my messages. Okay. Looks as though there's nobody else waiting to come in, so we'll get started. Not expecting any technical issues, but if there are, please stay online and I'll come back into the meeting. As always, keep your microphones muted. I can see everyone's done that, just so that there isn't any background noise or interference. I apologise for the slightly washed out look on my computer for my face. It'll be rectified next week, so hopefully we won't have these issues again the next time I do a parent workshop. Okay, so as I said briefly at the start, the purpose for today is to help parents understand what happens when children with SEND move from year groups or phases. It's also to explain IEPs, or individualised education plans, and student profiles, or SPs, clearly and simply. Those are the two main documents that students with SEND are using once they move past a sort of more informal monitoring phase. And finally, to emphasise and to show how parents are involved at different levels, depending on the level of the child's needs, and to help you understand what your role is in supporting your child's support at school. So the key messages for today are that the support that your child receives, any child in our school, but especially those with SEND needs, moves with them. And that's really my role. For younger children, though they still have quite a large number of outclass teachers, they have an intense period of time of 1 year with an overseas and a Thai tutor, and then they'll move to a new team the following year. It changes slightly in secondary because a child might expect to be taught by the same maths or English teacher in different years of their secondary career. So it's really my job to make sure that the information that we have for each child and the support that we give is maintained, and that's a continuous process, the assessing, planning, doing and reviewing of that, which I'll talk about a bit today as well. So this is how support is structured at ANS. So there are four kind of broad layers of support, and again it depends on the child's needs, which obviously can be greater or lesser, and can be more long-term or can be quite short-term needs. So at the top there in that column, you can see that the first thing, hopefully, that all children receive is classroom adaptations and monitoring from the teachers themselves. Teachers may come to me and book an informal drop-in to ask me about my advice for a particular child. But on the whole, that's an informal process. And the teachers will be adjusting their teaching approaches. They might be speaking to their year leaders about making sure that the child's experience is the same in different classrooms. And they'll be keeping a close eye on the child's progress. The main thing to understand is that there isn't a formal plan. There's no document in place at that stage. This is where we're just sort of monitoring a child. We're gathering evidence. I talked a lot about gathering evidence before meeting parents in the last workshop last week. So that's the very sort of general level. And there are a large number of students at that level. As a school, we have over 1,000 students on roll. And at any one time, there might be between 50 and 100, between 5 and 10% of students that we're looking at just in a little bit more detail, just to sort of say to ourselves, is there an issue here? Do we need to look at more formalized support? And oftentimes it might be temporary. It might be a social emotional issue. And these things may drift away, and the student may sort of move out of monitoring. But sometimes the opposite might be true, and it might be decided that we do need to sort of inform parents and create a sort of more specific plan of support. Then the second row down is where the student profiles come in. So if you like, after the monitoring level, if we've decided that students definitely do need something more robust, they'll move to a student profile. And that is a practical support plan that is created with the child's strengths and needs at the centre. And it helps teachers to respond consistently. So rather than individual teachers recording their own concerns and perhaps coming to me separately or to their year leaders or phase leaders for advice, we're now saying that this child benefits from these strategies applied consistently across all lessons. And so the plan will be co-created with the homeroom teachers and then distributed to all staff, and all staff would then be expected to follow it. It might be that some strategies are not possible or not practical in some lessons, but we would be expecting most teachers to be following most of the strategies for nearly all the time once the child has a support plan in place in this way. Children that are issued one of these plans, the parents will then be informed. And the parents usually will be given the choice, you know, do they want to come in and talk about it in more detail with me? Would they like to do that? But at this stage, it's more sort of in-house. The teachers are doing it and the parents are informed rather than invited to sort of participate. So that's a student profile. Then if we find that the student is very far behind, perhaps there are some safety or behavior issues, perhaps there might be a more serious need that's been diagnosed externally. For a mixture of reasons, we might then decide that the student profile is not sort of enough. We might then look at involving parents more closely. And for students that we make that decision for, they will then move to an IEP, so an individual education plan. And this is a very, very personalised plan. We're moving beyond the level of group interventions and maybe sort of making sure teachers are doing or using consistent language. We're actually moving to a very personalised plan with very specific targets, very specific actions that are individualized to that student. I won't talk about numbers, but there are a significant number of students across the whole school, more than a few in each phase, with this level of support. These are then reviewed more regularly, and parents will be invited in to sit down with key staff, myself, perhaps the counsellor working with the child, perhaps the LSA, and certainly the homeroom teachers in foundation and primary. At secondary level, it might be the deputy head teacher, or for a more severe case, even the head teacher that joins that meeting. And where appropriate, the student. Obviously, with very young children, usually in foundation, children don't come to the meetings, perhaps just the last 5 minutes. By sort of year 5, 6, certainly into secondary, the children would definitely be coming to a part of the meeting. And with much older students, there are very few older students with this level of support, because by the time they get to year 11, 12, 13, they're mostly much more mature, and they generally we kind of know what we're doing with that child, and there's not so much need for parents to come in as often. But obviously those much older children will play a much stronger role in driving that plan and what they think their target should be. So it does vary by age. And then finally, still at IEP level, but working more closely with external specialists like educational psychologists, medical teams at hospitals for students with more complex needs. So there's kind of the IEP level is split into two, I suppose you would say. And at that very, very sort of more serious level, we would be working with families and encouraging families to share reports from any outside treatment, maybe even make direct contact with external professionals that are supporting the child, so that we can really work as a team around the child to give that child the most holistically professional support that we can inside school, but as well as outside. So those are the sort of layers of support that we offer. So let's have a look more closely then at the second level. So the targeted classroom support, the student profile. And on this slide, you can sort of see a summary of how these work. I'll open one in a minute and go into it in a bit more detail. So the challenges that the student faces are clearly described. The strengths that the student has as well are at the heart of this plan so that we can play to the student's strengths as much as possible. There's a column for practical classroom strategies. That's the QFT, quality first teaching, we call it, which is basically quality first teaching is tools in the teacher's toolbox that enhance learning for every child, not just children with particular needs, but every child. But when we talk about QFT in SEND support plans, what we're talking about is helping teachers pick out aspects of their general teaching toolkit that will work particularly well for this child for these reasons. So on these plans, you'll see aspects of teachers' practice that all teachers should be doing and in our school do generally do, but ones which we're paying particular attention to helping teachers be consistently applying for this child. That's what we mean by QFT. And these plans are then reviewed and updated twice a year by core staff. Importantly, they do not contain details of diagnoses, medication. There's no family information. There's no information from parents about home life or anything like that. There's no external medical information or record of behaviour concerns in terms of causes of concern, attendance, punctuality, all of that detailed data, academic data. None of that goes onto one of these. These are purely to support the teacher in helping the student receive better and more consistent standards of interventions from them in the classroom. At the top of the plan, other interventions are listed for the student, but the point is it's a plan that's put into place, but it doesn't have the level of detail of an IEP. Okay, so let's go into this now and have a look in more detail as to what this looks like. And I'll just share my tab as well. Okay, so this is a completely fabricated one. This is not a real student profile. It's just to demonstrate to you today for the purposes of this workshop. So as you can see, the purple row at the top is just basic information about the student. We'd have the date that the plan was first created and then a review date put into place. We'd have information about the child's key staff over on the right-hand side in these boxes here. And then any information about current interventions or planned interventions would go here. So for this child, maybe they've got an LSA in class with them supporting twice a week. Maybe they've got one session with the counsellor once a week. Things like that would go into this box. And then moving down, you can see we've got strengths here. So this particular student has strong factual knowledge in science. They like animals, geography. They've got a very good memory for routines. They enjoy clear rules and structure. So the strengths can be a variety of things. It could be things that we know subject-based. It could be to do with sporting or interests outside school. Anything that we feel we can help teachers use as a way to engage the child or to help the child in the classroom will go into the strengths box. And again, it does vary by age, but it can be about personality strengths. It can be about just anything that teachers have noticed that the child loves or is good at. So I've tried to put quite a varied list in that column, just to give you an idea of the types of things that we would record. And then on the challenges faced, again, this could be subject-based. So it might be that a younger child we're starting to notice they've got specific difficulty with maths, perhaps, or with spellings in English, or with writing in Thai. Could be any specific academic difficulty, but it's also to do with their social and emotional development. So for this student, becomes anxious when the routine changes, or their organisation skills are not as good as they should be for their age, or perhaps they just find it difficult to start tasks without an adult being with them to support. These are the different types of challenges that we would record in the student profile for all teachers to be aware of. And then probably the most important one, the third column, the QFT that I was talking about just before, which is where we're handpicking strategies from the toolbox that all teachers have in their training and expertise, and we're making these the consistent ones that all teachers must use, so that the experience of the child in the classroom does not vary from one teacher to the next. So for example, They are always going to be given advance warning of any changes to routine. They are always going to be given a visual timetable at the start of each day. They'll be given and expected to follow a simple homework checklist. So these are all the different types of strategies that the teachers and the homeroom teachers would then be following through, using calm, predictable language to name feelings, this type of thing. Now, of course, it's not perfect. And then it becomes my job. It becomes the job of year leaders and middle and senior leaders to monitor teachers on these plans and to make sure that they follow them. But once these plans have been created and sent out to teachers, they'll read them and then adapt their practice accordingly. And then finally, again, depending on the age of the student, we've got this column for I will help myself by, and these are actions that the student is encouraged to do for themselves. We want the students, again, at an age appropriate level, to be as responsible as possible for following themselves. And so we have the I will help myself. So bringing their equipment, packing their bag the night before, asking for help if they don't understand. And we try not to make this list more than about 3 to 5 long, because we want children to focus well on a few things rather than trying to do lots and lots of different things. It's also translated into Thai language so that Thai staff can access this easily and quickly. And then there are boxes at the bottom for reviews. Okay, so that is the student profile. And just as a reminder, these slides will be shared at the end of the session, or later today or tomorrow, with all parents in all phases. Okay, so you'll be able to have another look at this in the recording. Let me come back to the main parent workshop slide series. Hopefully you can see that now, and we'll move on to look at how these are reviewed and created. So I've talked about this already, but just as a summary, we follow the UK Code of Practice SEND guidelines, which are assess, plan, do, review. APD are the assessment, as I said in last week's workshop, teacher input, and as children get older, student voice. We then plan using key staff. We agree strategies. These are, again, where possible, agreed with the child according to the phase. We then put the plan into place, and this happens daily in class and outside class with the range of teachers. And then for student profiles, twice a year, we review what's working, what's not working, to see if we can adjust the plan and improve it. Okay, so that's the process that's followed for student profiles. Just going to pause to admit somebody that's waiting to join. Okay. Right. Let's move on to IEPs then. So if you're just joining, we're about halfway through. We've summarized the monitoring, the student profile for medium classroom support. We're now looking at more serious and more sustained, more robust support in the form of individual education plans. So again, we would record strengths, interests, but the IEP moves to a higher level of context. It's a much more detailed plan and much more created together with parents. So we're getting much more information about the child in one place. Again, core needs will be identified, but there are more clear targets that are set on an IEP, and the actions are more robust as well. The action section for the targets will be divided clearly into sections for the school, but also for the child and for the parents as well. So parents are expected to complete actions in order to support the child more fully at home. And these are all agreed at the meetings, of course. So the key differences between an IEP and an SP is more robust data on things like academics, behaviour, mindset to learning, their attendance and punctuality, more robust targeting, as I've just said as well. Okay, so let's dive into one of these now. Again, just a blank one. Well, it's not blank. I've filled it in with information that we might feasibly have, but it's not based on any particular child. It's just for the purposes of this Google Meet. So similarly to the student profile that we just saw, the top sections in Amnoice in pink are basic data about the child. And then underneath, we would have another section which goes into more detail for interests, for fun, key students, like how they work with other students, who their best friends are, do they experience issues with students? That would go in the left-hand box. Again, there's a space to put key staff information. We've got We've got a more curricular kind of approach, so subject strengths and subject to improve. Students at IEP level, it's more usual in primary and secondary. We do sometimes have students at IEP level in foundation as well, but usually there's a curricular focus on these that isn't there so strongly with the student profiles. And mindset to learning. So you can see here we've got some, this is much less information than I would have in a proper IEP, but just to give you a bit of a look, you know, we can see this student computing and science are strengths. They're struggling with written work in Thai language, humanities in UK, extended writing, organisation across subjects. This is actually for more of a, say, roughly like a year 8 level secondary student. And then further down, you can see where this data really starts to drill down. So we would have, for a student on an IEP level, we would aim to have between 2 and 4 meetings per year with parents, depending on the level of need. So we might have the first meeting, say, 4 or 5 weeks into term 1.1. And here I would be including the attendance and punctuality information from the previous years, the sanction information, the causes for concern that were raised by teachers. We would then discuss those at the meeting. We'd also then look at the information on each of those areas for the academic year so far. So in this particular case, I'd noticed that the attendance has fallen slightly. The punctuation has dropped very slightly. So it might be that we talk to parents about that. Has something happened? Is there a clear reason? If not, you know, is the child, you know, is there something to unpick there? So we're tracking over time, core data, academic data, attendance, punctuality, behaviour data, rewards data. We're tracking it over 2 to 4 times a year to really get a very clear picture of, are things improving? Are they stable? Are they getting worse for this child? And then adjusting the plans accordingly. The most important difference from the student profile to the IEP is the degree of parent involvement. So this next box, the life outside school, this is the parents' opportunity at the meetings to fill us in on the last 3 to 4, 5 months since the last meeting. What's been happening? How are relationships at home? What tuition is the child receiving? What medical support is the child receiving? Has there been any change in medication, or is there a new diagnosis to be aware of? All of those things would be recorded. So there's a level of detail on these plans that's not there on the student profiles. And then core issues would be identified a little bit further down, similarly to the challenges section on the student profile. And then a much more robust target section. So this child has 3 targets and then 2 personal actions for each target for themselves. And then parents have also agreed in this fictitious plan to these targets as well. So this is not dissimilar, actually. This level of detail is not dissimilar to a normal IEP that we would have. They're treated very confidentially and they're only shared with teachers that need to know, and usually they're not even shared in this full form. This full form is really just for the family, for the student if they're old enough, for me, and for the year leader at secondary or the homeroom teachers at primary and foundation. There's only probably 4 or 5 staff that will know this plan in this level of detail. Teachers will receive a much shorter slide that just has the targets, a very short summary of the need. So for teachers, that's what they need really, and the adaptations that they're making in class. The information is held, and if teachers want to know more background, they might come to me and I might talk to them about it, but it's not generally shared. Well, it isn't shared generally with teachers. So I'd like to make that clear. Usually for children at this sort of more serious level needing an IEP, there's a much, as I said earlier in the meet, there's a much greater level of school intervention. So we might have the QFT things linked, but we might also have the LSAs following a bespoke plan, one-to-one support. There might be specific targets that the counsellor is working on with that child. So everything's just at a much more level of detail. I would be prioritising students with IEPs throughout the year. So that means I'm talking with staff and popping into lessons more than with students at the other levels. And in some cases, the most extreme cases that we have in the school, probably there's no more than a handful. But I would be working very, very closely with families, sometimes on a daily basis, through star charts, behaviour charts, through just keeping updated really. Daily, probably with very few families actually at the moment, but certainly week to week, month to month, going into lessons, supporting with teachers, and making sure that staff feel very well supported personally with students at the greatest level of need. And then at the bottom, like on the student profile, there's another place for the targets to be reviewed. So in this, we would review them by colouring them red, orange, yellow, and green. Green is the target is fully met consistently. Yellow, it's met but not consistently. Orange, it's partially met, and red, it's either that's an action or a target that didn't end up being met, or it's an intervention or an idea on the plan that wasn't followed, and that can sometimes happen as well if we're honest. So that's the IEP, and I hope that's useful for you, and I hope that that's given you a much stronger idea of how support is delivered to children at different levels of need in our school. Let's go back to the main sequence of slides now, and I'll go on to the next page as well. Hang on a minute, just juggling my tabs. Okay. So as before, so a quick reminder then on this slide how they're reviewed and created. So again, the APDR cycle is followed. There's more information at every stage. So we would have formal observations of the children, more formal data collection, as I've explained, more formal teacher input through documentation rather than just verbally. Parents would be consulted more deeply, as I've just been talking about, and as appropriate, students as well themselves. The older they are, the more they would be at the heart of this process. There might be external data coming in as well from medical and other professionals outside the school. We then plan, agree the targets and strategies together with the family, and robustly monitor the teachers delivering that as well. Just admitting another guest. Okay. Support then would happen daily, in class, outside school. Sometimes I'd be delivering interventions personally myself, depending on the type of intervention that's been agreed. Looking at what's working, what needs adjusting, and as I said, parent meetings at least twice, sometimes up to 4 times a year in some very serious cases. So parents are more heavily involved, regular meetings, updates, home strategies matter, parents become key strategic partners. Okay. So I finished the first half, well, it's actually more than half, going into this level of detail on how students are supported with meeting their needs at different levels across the school. And for the last 5 or 10 minutes, probably about 5 minutes, it's not a long section, I'll be talking about transitions. And actually, it's not me that's responsible for transitions, even of SEND students. This is done by the year leader and the phase coordinators, organising things like the very special Year 6 day that Year 6 have in secondary phase in Year 7, and the Year 7s go back to their Year 6 teachers to tell them all about life in secondary. That's very popular and effective part of our transition programme from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. But of course, the head teacher, Mr. Ensuing, Miss D in Foundation, is obviously working closely with teachers in Year 2 to transition students through to Year 3. But my role really in terms of transition is to give the information and support to those leaders about how information is transferred and about the needs that will go from one to the next. Because we have to plan as a school for our LSA support teams, our counsellors, and sometimes we might have, there might just be a greater level of need in one year group than another year group. And if that year group then is moving phase, then obviously it'd be up to me to reallocate the resources in the phase above, which will have grown with a larger number of students with SEND coming into that year group. So what is a transition? It's any time that a student moves class, or more usually moves from one year to the next, sometimes crossing into a new phase. And this can be an anxious time for parents as well, because often you become attached to the routines and the staff in one phase. You might look back on your own school days with some anxiety about changes from one school to another, and you want your child to experience this particular, as smooth as they can. And for children with additional needs, this can sometimes be, we recognise, causing of anxiety. And so it's my role to sort of work with other staff to make that as smooth as possible. So what you need to know, a lot of things, it's about keeping them the same. So SEND information is stored centrally and will be accessible to the new teachers in the new phase. For students with IEPs and student profiles, it's a slightly different process. For students with IEPs, they'll be directly briefed about the child that they'll be teaching. For primary and in secondary, during the start of the year inset days, we have a special meeting, as well, a special session where I will talk about each child and their needs, so that all of the primary staff get the same message, and we'll see the plan together in that meeting. The strategies continue. Of course, there's no way to make it perfectly consistent because the child will have different teachers, and of course we're all human and teachers will deliver strategies in their own way. But the child support plan will essentially stay the same but move with them to the new phase. My oversight continues, and it becomes, I become the sort of critical way in which the child support is maintained and monitored from one year to the next. So the key message is that children do not start again as such at transitions. It's not like this is a new child that we don't know anything about, and we're waiting for a new, perhaps a new someone to draw attention to the problems or issues that they may have. That's not the way it works. All of that information is and support goes with them. Moving on. So some things will obviously change. Support may increase, reduce, or adapt. And during a key transition, we do look closely at whether support needs to go up, whether it can be reduced to try to help support independence. Ultimately, it's a very fine line, but we're always trying to put in only the support that a child needs and not any more, because we don't want children to become dependent on having that LSA or having that counselling session. We want them to be, we want that support to be a bridge to independence, if that makes sense. New routines in staff and teachers in classrooms can be fantastic new opportunities. Children, especially those with SEN, can often soar with a new framework and a new context. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it can be that they're ready for a change, and sometimes children, they're really mature and they want to be in the next phase of the school and they're looking forward to it. So we can take advantage of that in my department to refresh plans and to refresh targets as well. So just in a bit more detail then, and as points on a list, how do we prepare students? As I said already, there's transition meetings between staff. This may look as simple as me delivering information to secondary about a group of students with needs. For the more for the children with quite serious and complicated needs with quite detailed IEPs, they would be confidential meetings with the year leader and the phase leaders that I would have. Sometimes even with the parents there. At this time of year, actually, when we're looking at reviewing the whole year, I do sometimes, at key transition points, I will sometimes invite the year leader or the phase leader of the next year group along to the meeting so that they've got a bit of an idea about the year that the child has had already. So the higher up the higher the level of support, the more bespoke the level of intervention that I will put in, the more bespoke the planning I will do to help that child transition to the next year or phase. They might have gradual exposure to new routines. So quite often with year 6 to year 7, for example, where students are predictably going to find the new routines difficult because of their IEP, we might bring them for a separate walk around the D&T classrooms. We might introduce them to the science labs. They might have a personal guided tour. They might have somebody from secondary come and talk to them. So they have those extra sessions to help them feel a bit more secure rather than just the same as everybody else. And they'll also, I'll be working with the year 7 year leader to make sure that those students have extra check-ins. So week 1 and week 2, they'd have somebody knocking on their door and just looking after them, probably at least daily. And then after the first few weeks, still at least once a week, me or the year leader or their LSA would be checking in with them to make sure they're okay and that everything's working well. So the final section, I think this is the final section on transition, is how parents can support. And a lot of it is common sense, but I'll go through it with you as well. So to talk positively about the change, I think it's very easy as parents to sort of worry about our own negative experience of change and transfer that to our children. There's lots of reasons why moving up a phase is exciting and new for children, and you can really press the grown up, the independent, this is a chance for you to really show how mature you are, that sort of conversation. At times of change in school, it's important to keep things at home as routine as possible. If I know it's not always easy with life changes, moving house, holidays and things. I know it's not easy, but if you can, try to keep routines at home the same during periods of your child's life where there are changes happening at school. Share worries with school early, and encourage your child. Sorry, that should say share worries with the school, not with your child. Share worries with the school early, and encourage your child to share worries with you early. It's better to tell you than to keep it all closed up, especially with older children. Once the transition has happened, be talking to your child every day. Like, I know children don't tend to say, tell us what's happened at school. They tend to say they can't remember, or, nothing much happened. But give them the chance to tell you about their school days every day after the transition, and encourage them to tell you what was the best thing that happened today. Did anything happen to worry you? What was the worst thing that happened? And then if necessary, and if your child has additional needs, then you can contact me or another member of the team. And finally, trust the process. We at M&Racing, we take a lot of care and time making sure that children of all backgrounds and needs transition smoothly, and the teachers are very well trained to spot children that are not adjusting well or that are having difficulties. So those are picked up very early. So please do trust our process. So the key message, I guess, is that working together with the school, we can make the transitions for your child better and smoother. Okay, so key messages to take away before I finish. SEND support is graduated and responsive. We assess, we plan, we do and review, and that process continues throughout the life of your child at our school. IEPs and student profiles are collaborative. So student profiles are collaborative within school at the staff level. IEPs are collaborative beyond school at the parent and external provision level. Transitions are planned and not sudden. We deliver them in a planned and thoughtful and deliberate way, and not an ad hoc and responsive and reactive way. And parents are key partners throughout all of these things. Okay, we've come to the end. So once again, if you would like to stay and ask me a question or two, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, please do look out for the slides and the recording when it's sent out by phase leaders on YouTube later this week. I hope you found the session useful, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recorded version. And please, again, do contact me. My email address, I think, is on the first slide if you want any more information about any of the topics I've covered today. I look forward to talking to parents again next year about more SEND issues. And until then, enjoy the rest of the academic year, and take care. Bye-bye.